Thanks for having me. I'm going to try to project as loud as I can. So can you hear me okay? Yeah? So I've got this rough job of being between you and your lunch, so I'll try not to be long-winded. But my background is in user experience design. I've been thinking a lot about user experience design for a number of years, doing a lot of work at MailChimp. Started the UX practice there, and that consisted of front-end developers, UI designers, and researchers. And today I want to share some stories, particularly about what happened with research and how that informed a lot of the design process at MailChimp. And a moment of existential crisis that I had that led to an interesting revelation about how we could maybe do research a little bit better. So that's where I'm coming from. So I found that in our personal situations at MailChimp, that early on, a lot of times we were shooting from the hip, and we kind of heard that suggested in the panel discussion earlier, that a lot of times research is seen as optional. You don't really need to do it. And it's kind of ironic because if you invest a lot of time and money into the wrong direction, it can totally throw off profit, success of a company, success of a product, et cetera. So just having some time and space to think about what you're doing is really important. Shooting from the hip is pretty common out there. And at MailChimp, we certainly did that for a while just because we were such a small team. When I was hired, I was number 4. I was the first design hire, and I didn't have time to do front-end development and UI design and research, but somehow I did that all at the same time. It was kind of a mashup of skills, which I love, but it's really challenging. So shooting from the hip, it's not always a good thing. It can produce some not great results. But over time, as we started to hire people, we started to have some space to do some research. And research looked like a lot of different things. We started by doing a lot of customer interviews. And I'm just curious, do you guys raise your hand if you actually get to talk to your customers on a regular basis? Yay, that's an incredibly small amount of people. I learned so much from just doing interviews, and I found that there's an art to conducting a really good interview, getting good information out of people, leaving open space so they can just sort of spill their guts. When you close your notebook and they say, well, there's one other thing I wanted to tell you, and that turns out to be the nugget of gold that you walk away with because they don't feel like they're on the record. So we started to do a lot of customer interviews, and some of them were just around town, people that we knew that were customers. And eventually that turned into phone interviews, and we got to the point where I think last year we traveled something like 120,000 miles to 4 continents, talking to a lot of customers, and on the phone a lot, talking to people. And again, as our practice evolved, we got the chance to do usability testing. So we would bring people in, and we'd have them use the product in front of the design and engineering teams, and they would quake in their seat and cry at how poorly their product performed. And then they wouldn't even make it back to their desks because the moment that user left, they would be huddled together trying to hatch plans of how to make that better, which I love, usability testing. So there's more information that's gathered here as well. We collected so much customer feedback because when I started, there were just a few hundred customers, and now it's something like 10 million customers around the world. You can imagine that generates a fair bit of customer feedback that we do have to process and listen to and find patterns in. Mentioned earlier, analytics. That can tell you a whole lot about what's happening in your product, how people are interacting on the marketing site, what they do inside of the app, what features they use or don't use. And so for me, this kind of all added up to be this data overload. And I realize that for some people in here, you may not have hit that point where it's like all these things piled up on top of you, because there's kind of this ramp up where you just wished you had more inputs, and then you get to this threshold where you've got so many inputs that you just can't process it anymore, and you can't find meaning. And this was what was happening for us with our team, that we would learn something in a usability test, and then 6 months down the road, they kind of leaked out of our ears onto our pillows. We would learn it and we would lose it. And that, for me, was really problematic. Someone on the team discovered something very meaningful, and the other people on the team don't have that information anymore. And it occurred to me as I became increasingly frustrated with that scenario, what we were doing really well was collecting a lot of data. That's good. All the interviews, all the usability tests, all the analytics, customer feedback, et cetera. Then we would turn that into information. So we would look at that and say, like, what is this? What does it really mean when someone says this particular feature doesn't behave the way that I expected? And then we would turn that into knowledge of like, okay, I get it. I know where they're coming from. I understand the context. I know what to do. But rarely could we ever get to the top of this hierarchy, or this pyramid, which is wisdom, become really wise about your product, your market, your customer base, so you can make a really incredible product. I feel like, today there's a lot of tools that help us make good products. It's still really, really hard to make a great product and make a great company. And companies that are really great and outstanding, they get to this point where they get wisdom. They don't just understand, they don't just have all the data to work with, they've got the inputs, then they do something with that, and then they find meaning and take action. But how do we take action and then put that into a bigger picture, a broader picture, using critical thinking? It's hard to do. And that was this crisis that we were having, that I was having. Because without that wisdom, it's really hard to have an effective strategy of what you're trying to do. What do we want to do in the next year, this roadmap? And why do we want to do that? Because what's that going to do for our customer base? How's that going to grow the company? How's it going to generate more revenue? Whatever. So as I started to process this myself, I started to talk to other people that were in a kind of a lead UX position, and they were struggling with similar things. And it occurred to me that what we needed more than anything, we've got all the data points, information and knowledge, but we aren't making the connections. We being the team at MailChimp. But we as an industry as well. It's hard to make those connections. So to this moment of existential crisis that I had, that this is like my breaking point, so I'm sharing something personal with you. So all the customer feedback would come in through a form on the MailChimp website, and it all went to my inbox. And it was like metric shit tons of feedback. And it got to the point where I went into Gmail and I just kind of went bonkers. And I just felt like it was inbox infinity, that it would never end. It was all really interesting, meaningful information, and there was an email associated with a piece of feedback, so if I needed to talk to that person, I knew who to talk to, but I just couldn't process it all. And I tried to divvy it up with other team members, which the mechanics of that was very difficult. And two, it still became too much to keep track of. So I had this idea, let's just burn it down and just dump it and back to inbox zero. But if you're the director of UX and you're throwing all the customer feedback out, chances are you're probably not worth your salt. So I couldn't morally do that, but I had to figure out a way to do this. So I'm sort of a MacGyver type of person where I'm going to do something on the fast and on the cheap and just figure out a solution for now that's going to help me, move forward. And so what I ended up doing was I just set up a Gmail filter and routed all of those feedback emails directly into Evernote because I could set up a free account and there's a secret email address. Do you know that you can do that? And it all goes in there, and then it's searchable and taggable, and you can go find all that stuff. I'm telling you this not as an advertisement for Evernote because I have lots of beefs with Evernote. I'm just telling you this this is my MacGyver approach. I pulled out the duct tape, and this is what the duct tape looked like. So all the feedback started to funnel into a place. And it's effectively a database. And what's interesting about that is it's a database that I can search really well, and I can find those email addresses, and then I can start to find patterns. So there was a point where we were working on a new feature, and some people, including the CEO, had questions about that feature and what types of things that our customers really wanted. So, I could have stopped and started this big research project, but we have tight turnaround times, that whole agile environment. So how do I move quickly and be informed at the same time? So when I got that question, I was just like, well, let's see what's over here in this MacGyver duct tape solution. Did a quick search, and it was really interesting. So I searched for RSS. There's this RSS email thing we were working on, and I found 45 pieces of feedback about that particular feature that was existing that we wanted to improve. And what was interesting is 45 emails I can read through, and I can read through that in an hour or two. And it's small enough that I can grok it and say here's the pattern of the things that keep happening. And when I want to follow up with those people, I can shoot them a quick email and say hey, can I hop on Skype for 5 minutes, 10 minutes with you just to talk about this? And I can do that really quickly and come up with something that's meaningful and relevant to users. And to me, this was sort of this OMG moment where I felt like this is incredibly powerful. We could do a whole lot more with this. So I started to think of Evernote, their whole tagline is remember everything. And that's kind of how I came to this process was we would learn it and then lose it. But I started to think about what if it was more about discovering everything? If I could get all the things into one place that's searchable, and I could find more significant, meaningful patterns. So that's what I started to do. Is I'd get other people to start putting in more data, or I'd stream in some data. So the account closing survey, when someone closes a MailChimp account, we ask them a quick survey. Why'd you close your account? That stuff's really interesting and meaningful and related to the customer feedback thing that could be searchable. All the interviews we've been doing, those transcripts, those notes are in there as well. And I started to think about this as streams of data coming in. It's content, but it's really streams of information, data that's coming in that we turn into information and knowledge. And hopefully, if it's in this permanent location that's searchable, we can start to create wisdom. So account closing surveys were streams. Blog comments can be pushed in as streams if there's someone that's monitoring the blog. Analytics. With Google Analytics, you can say, send me a PDF report of all mobile traffic on the website for the past week. Send it to me at 9 a.m. on Monday at this email address. Did you know you can do that? It's super easy thing to do. And if you just put in the Evernote address, it'll go into there. So it all just streams in. Now, it's a PDF with a lot of charts and stuff, but Evernote does the OCR stuff. Their founders, these Russian guys, actually worked on OCR for the Newton back in the 90s. I don't know if you know that, but their OCR is off the chain. It's so good. It's the best I've seen. If you've got Google Alerts tracking your competitors, just have it go to that secret email address. It goes in the same place. We had delivery stats, so stats on performance of what's happening in the app, which is sometimes interesting. If you're doing industry research, you're reading articles about what's happening in the world and the industry, how many people are using Android devices and chatbots and whatever, that can be funneled in as well. Every time we released a version of the product, there's an email that goes out to the company that says, this is what's in it, and we would just CC that secret address to go in the same place, so that's discoverable too. Support data, some trends or key ticket items that could go in there as well. If you want to get crazy, you could dump it all in there. We didn't. We did smaller portions. We conduct surveys, like we do an annual survey, or we do a specific, very targeted survey on a specific topic. And in SurveyMonkey, Survey Gizmo, all those tools, you can just take a screenshot, which creates a ping, and you drop that into Evernote. So it's a screenshot, but it's all searchable, right? Because it's OCR. And I'll give you an example of how that can be used in just a second. But we started to put that in there too. Tweets that were potentially relevant, Not all tweets are, but if it's critical feedback, that could go in there as well. So you get the picture. Like you could stream in a lot of data, an awful lot of data into this one place where you can search and find all kinds of different patterns and learn on the fly, moving research at the speed of the rest of the company. So it started to look more like this, where it was like 1 or 2 notebooks, and now it's like a boatload of notebooks. Lots and lots of stuff. And so it started out as a project for me. I set up a personal account. Then we converted that to a business account, and that was part of, owned by my team. And then it was owned by a lot of people. And teams like the QA team started using it a lot, product team, engineering, et cetera. So it became this shared ownership thing. We're all in this together. And that's very interesting when you create these scenarios where everyone gets value, because if they all find value in that, then it can squelch some political turmoil and encourage more people to participate too. So I discovered that when you start to stream in data from lots of different places, from different teams, when you've got everyone's data, data for everyone and everyone's data, it's like open for the company, everyone to participate. Everyone wants to get involved, they find value. It's a win for not just a research team, but for everybody. Because anyone can ask crazy questions and find answers. So you start to connect these data points, and what's interesting is you actually start to connect people. Fascinating, did not see that one coming, but that's the result of that experiment. The mechanics of how this works. Email is the API, which I love. It's that secret email address, and if you can send an email, you can put stuff into the database. There are lots of other systems out there that are used. I've talked to the UK government, like their digital services, basically, and they use WordPress. And WordPress, you can stream stuff in with an email address as well, and it's searchable. And I've seen people create custom tools. Evernote is not the perfect solution, but this whole idea of getting everyone's stuff in there and it's going in easy and it's coming out easy, that's critical, whatever tool you use. So with Evernote, in the subject line of the email, it's almost like an @ reply on Twitter. You just say @ and UX interviews, @ analytics, and that will route it into a specific notebook. Because if everything's in the same notebook, it gets a bit hairy and crazy. So having separate notebooks is better because then you can do specific searches. Look inside of the customer interviews notebook for the word Android versus across everything. And then if you want to tag things, tag it with a particular persona, tag it with a particular topic, you just add a pound, just like, again, on Twitter, you can add a hashtag to the subject line, and Evernote's email processor just routes it with the @ reply and the hashtag. This is the key, though. It's got to be easy in, easy out if you're going to do this sort of thing, where you've got this clearinghouse for all of the data that you're going to turn into information and knowledge and create wisdom. If it's not easy in, like with an email, if you have to teach someone, if there is a firewall that people have to log into to input the data, what do you think will happen? No one will participate. If there's nothing in there, it is not valuable. If it's not easy to retrieve, what do you think will happen? No one will participate, and it will not have value. If it's not easy in, easy out, it just doesn't work. So just like we're trying to create a great user experience for our customers, we've got to do that for ourselves and for our colleagues because we're not lazy, we're just busy, right? So our Evernote started to look like this, where there's just tons of tags. We did some experiments where we actually would tag with personas too, which was kind of fun and interesting. Didn't always work, but was an interesting experiment. So the way that we would use this, like in a project, you go in there and you do a quick search, you find some things. And so I'm going to give you an example of how powerful this can be when you've got all the different streams coming in. So I'm going to do a search for Android. And these are customer interviews. I talked to this guy in San Francisco, that guy in Athens, Georgia. Here are some articles from the web about Android usage, how it's struggling in the enterprise because of malware, trends and data about percentage of use, etc. I see some, that looks like a tweet, some sort of tweet talking about Android usage in MailChimp. Customer feedback that's been emailed in. Let's see what else. That definitely is a tweet. This is an account closing survey. These are screenshots from a survey that we sent out. They're just pings. But inside of the screenshot is the word Android, and the OCR found that word. That's so cool. Right? So you get the ideas. Like, you're getting a broad perspective and a narrow perspective. Broad being, this is what's happening in our world. We're reading the news and seeing what's happening with Android usage. That's the macro vision. All the way down to the micro vision, to an individual customer who's struggling with a particular issue on our Android app. That's a very broad picture that has a lot of power, that gives us context. So you do a search, then we would stage this up, like these are the patterns we saw. Sometimes that would go into a spreadsheet with things that we found, people that we want to talk to. We would kind of tag it to find patterns there and get further information. And then we'd collaborate, and a lot of times that would turn into some kind of a Google Doc. I don't know about you guys, but when I get Google Docs in my email now, I cry another tear. It's like so many Google Docs, I can't read all this stuff. So another thing that I've learned over the years of leading a UX team is that it's not enough to do the research, you've got to turn it into a story somehow. You've got to convey a story, and it's got to be easy to process. More about that in just a second, but what's interesting about this is that this is very conducive, this process, this whole connected UX process, connecting all the things, is very conducive to a known search. I have a specific topic that I'm looking for, but there's also this unknown search, like this ambient learning thing that happens. Easy in, easy out. I can browse this stuff. There's a mobile app for Evernote where I can see all this stuff that's coming in, and I can, literally I've done this in the grocery store line. I just open up Evernote and start reading what's coming in from customers. That's fascinating and interesting. And gives me access to things that I would normally, would probably pass by me. So easy in, easy out, the data becomes ubiquitous for everyone to consume. Passive learning, not just me, but everybody. We're all connected to our customer and to the big picture. So as I said, it's not enough to do the research. That's really important stuff, but we've got to tell stories. Give you an example, this was like 40 pages. This was a 40-page document that we did a few years ago. And it was full of really meaningful, interesting stuff, and people did read it. I printed copies and gave it to people, and they read it, but it was a struggle. It's not on someone's nightstand, right? So we tried a different approach, and we actually hired actors. I did a big study on mobile a few years back and discovered this interesting thing that was happening where people are using mobile devices, and that gives them this sense of found time. And that means their to-do list kind of keeps growing. They fill the time with more things, right? That's how we do it, right? And then that forces them to start to share tasks because they're overwhelmed, they need to collaborate. So the modern workplace is a place where you're always on, it's ubiquitous, and it's always collaborating. That was what the research showed us, what we discovered. And we made a video. It was like a minute and a half. And it did not show the product at all. There's no UI design. It just showed people in life going through the world. We shot it in like a week's time and then edited it in about 3 days. And we posted it on a password-protected Vimeo URL. And we could IM it, email it to people. We could say, hey, this is what we're doing for the redesign. Make that work. And that works so well. It's a beacon on the hill. It's a cliche to say a picture's tell 1,000 words. Whole lot more words more context and meaning than a 40-page research paper. So telling stories is powerful, but I don't have to tell you that. It's I-amable, which is great. It's memorable. Stories are powerful. So last piece here, and then we can chat, ask questions and so forth. But this example is a great story about how when you give people access to information, to data, they can actually do their job better and make a better product and serve your customers better. So this is a colleague, Stephen Martin, super smart guy. He's leading the mobile team. And he was curious. He was working on a redesign of the MailChimp mobile app. And he was working on the reports page, screen. And he was like, I wonder, I think I know what the hierarchy of information is here, but I don't know what people rely on the most, what our customers care about the most. So he went to Evernote and did a quick search. I think he was searching for open rate, et cetera, stuff like that. And he found a screenshot from one of our surveys that asked the question, what do you look at first in a report? And he made this little poster for himself. He called it his eye chart. And it's just a hierarchy of what people look at the most. This, and this, and this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then he designed a UI that presented the data that way. And here's the chart. That's the little screenshot that I took from SurveyMonkey, dropped it into Evernote. He found it with some clever searching. And then he made a UI that was more informed by what the customer needs. He never talked to me. He never talked to anyone on my team. He never asked, hey, could you guys go do some research for me? It just was there at his fingertips, and that informed the work that he did. I think that's really fascinating, really interesting, that if you can make the data available to more people, they can do their job better. They can be better at what they're doing. You can start to make smarter design decisions. We're not thinking about design as decoration. We're thinking about design as big D design, as solving problems for people. That's what we like to, it's what we do. So, filtering this data, quantifying things, getting the big picture, getting context is really powerful. And that is ultimately what, for us, got us to a place of wisdom. A big part of it is being in the habit of researching, of always asking questions. That's a really important part. Things I learned along the way, inevitably, companies have silos. We need to have teams. Teams have, there's these fiefdoms that divide us, prevent us from doing good work. I hear some people that are familiar with that scenario. You have data for everyone and everyone's data. When you make that open, you start connecting people and you create this open, collaborative environment. And you create a space where people can ask questions and they can start to find patterns. Patterns that would normally not be visible to them, that would slip past them. That's how you make really great products. You connect a lot of data. You connect people, your teams. You can work better together. And ultimately, the coolest thing about this experiment, to me, is creating a culture of inquiry where people ask questions. That's, when people ask crazy questions and get an answer, they'll ask another crazy question, and it just kind of is a virtuous cycle. That's what I got. Thanks, guys.